Welcome everyone to the Technical Challenge Appraiser training. This year's technical challenge is called Breaking Point. I'm Justin. I'm one of your three ACMs along with Tristan.
Hi,
Tristan, introduce
I'm,
yourself.
I'm I am Tristan, and I am also an ACM and also a co-ACM with Justin for the South Metro tournament.
Mhm. Yep, our third ACM is Amber. She is doing something much cooler than us. She is at a snowboarding competition today, so she is not able to attend. So we can feel sad that we're missing her, but glad that she's having a lot of fun. So, just to kind of give you an overview of what we're doing today, we're going to start with a big picture overview of the challenge. We're going to dive into the details. We're going to go through a series of questions, both from us to you to check your knowledge, and from you to us to answer any questions that we didn't answer. And finally, we're going to close out with just some last minute upkeep questions. So, to start off at a high level overview, this challenge has five key components. First, our team members are going to design and build an assembly and destruction equipment. So they're going to have two different tools that can assemble a stack of items, which is their second thing. So they've got 20 stack items that will be assembled with their assembly equipment. And then those 20 stack items will be destroyed with their destruction equipment. So the whole stick with the technical part of this challenge is they have to build up a big tower or maybe not a tower. We'll get into what we mean by a stack later on. So they build up a large stack with one device, and then they use another device to knock it over, and they get points for how accurately they destroy it. And we'll get into more about what we mean by accurately later. While they're doing this whole assembly and destruction thing, they're also going to be telling us a story about a character who lacks something important and attempts to gain it. So we'll hopefully be getting some interesting stories alongside our cool destruction. Lastly, every team will present two team choice elements that show off the team's interests, skills, areas of strengths, and talent. So these are complete wildcards. We can get anything from masterfully created artwork to a custom rendition of a well-known song. We get all kinds of really cool team choice elements from our teams. To give you an overview of what your appraiser team is going to look like, we're going to have 1 to 2 head appraisers. These are going to be usually your RCMs. They're going to be kind of keeping the challenge site running smoothly, getting everything together. There'll be 1 to 2 prep appraisers who are going to meet with the teams before they come on and present. And they're going to be making sure that they have all of their props there, all of their paperwork is in order, and that the documents that they're presenting to us are understandable by the team. So if we have any questions, the prep appraiser will kind of be our medium through which we do that. There's going to be one timekeeper announcer keeping us on schedule and announcing the teams and getting the audience hyped up. There'll be 2 team choice element slash story appraisers scoring the story components as well as the team choice element components. There'll be 2 technical elements appraisers scoring the destruction and assembly equipment and the stack items, and possibly 2 stack items appraisers. This year, the stack items are we'll get into details on this later, but when I said the accuracy of how they destroy the stack, this will take some really sharp eyes, and it's something that we want to make sure that, depending on how difficult it is to do, we might want to have an additional set of people working on this part of the challenge. So we'll have some pretty big teams this year, but it should be a good time. So that's the big picture overview. Now let's get into the details. Tristan, do you want to talk a little bit about the assembly and destruction equipment?
Yeah, so the assembly and destruction equipment are two distinct elements of this particular challenge that the team will build using technical methods. And they will have each one will have its own uh, set of categories, technical categories, one for technical design and one for technical innovation. And I believe there's a slide next for those. But uh, the core idea between design and implementation is, or design and innovation is, design is about like the implementation, how well it is assembled, like how well it works, is it reliable, predictable, etc. And innovation is all about the concept or the idea. Is it a really unique idea? Is it something that you've never seen before? really clever or creative in a way that you haven't seen from other teams, for example. Um, and these two elements are kind of key to the general technical scoring for the technical challenge. And like what is the analogy, I guess, is you know, teams that have really good technical design are like, nice fancy sports cars that are very clean and polished and fancy, where teams that have high innovation are like those uh, really custom creative like vehicles, that maybe run on garbage or something like that. And some teams have both elements. Some teams are stronger in one or the other. But like all of this scoring is about trying to give all teams the fairest possible chance in the event of, say, they build a really creative device, but it's not quite reliable. There's still in an area in the innovation side that they can get like full points for that, even if on the day of tournament that their design does not actually end up working. Um, and vice versa for the design. It could be like, something that they build really well. But, maybe they got the idea from somebody else, some YouTube video, uh, something they saw on the internet or something like that. But, it's really well built. It's really well assembled. They know all of the details about it, so they can get high implementation points, even or high design points, even if, the innovation is not quite there.
Just a couple of questions you can ask yourself while you're scoring to try to get a hang of if you think it's high for implementation or high for innovation. You can ask yourself, is the solution reliable? The more reliable the solution is, the better their design score is likely to be. So some solutions will work every single time, and if it's working every single time, that is an indication they might be high design. Likewise, how reproducible is it? So if they can do the same thing over and over again, and is it consistent? So that's really what we're getting at with implementation is, does it look polished and good? You can think about this also from like an engineering standpoint. Does it look like it's held together by duct tape and going to fall apart if you look at it wrong? Or does it look like it's relatively sturdily built and will continuously do the job, even if they had to do it over day in and day out over and over again? Uh, in the contrasting section, we can think about innovation by asking ourselves, how unique is this solution? Do you think that if you gave this challenge to a bunch of kids, how many of them would come up with a solution? Part of the assembly and destruction devices is being able to build these things, build up your stack. And we might think a lot of teams will come up with something like tongs. So if you give a bunch of teams this, they might all come up with tongs. So that might not be high on the innovation idea. Now, if they make those tongs and automate those tongs, we're increasing the score as opposed to them just being hot dog tongs that they bought at the store. Um, we can also ask ourselves, how removed is the team from the effect of the device? So if we continue with this tongs example, do they use the tongs in their own hands, or are the tongs controlled by some electronic mechanism, or are they controlled by something completely automatic where they're not involved in the process at all? So the farther away the team gets from the solution, the more innovation you might want to score. So before we move on, what questions do y'all have about design and innovation? And we'll take that as there not being any questions right now, but there'll be time for more questions later on. So next, let's dive a little bit more deeply into the process for assembly and destruction. Like we said, the big idea for this challenge is the team members have to assemble a stack and destroy the stack. And there's a whole process for doing this. First, the team is going to use their assembly equipment to assemble their stack items in the assembly zone. So looking a little bit forward, taped on the ground of the presentation area, we're going to have this diagram. So we'll have all of these boxes taped, and there'll be one box, the assembly zone, in which they're going to be assembling their stack. As you can see, when they do their destruction, they're getting more points the farther away from the assembly zone their destroyed items get. But for now, we're focusing in on this assembly zone, which is where they're going to be building their stack. If a team does not use all the stack items, unused stack items should be placed together to avoid outside the largest target zone to avoid possible loss of points. So they're going to stack these items. Ideally, all the stack items end up stacked inside the center box. But if they fail, we need to make sure they need to make sure that they get all the remaining items outside of the area. Um, After they are done with their assembly, they're going to signal to us. Their paperwork is going to tell us what the signal will be. It could be a team member raising their hand, or it could be a line in the story. We don't know. It's entirely up to the team. But the team is going to give us a signal that says we are about to start our destruction. And as soon as that happens, they are no longer allowed to assemble the stack anymore. Once they have given their signal, they will do the destruction mode, where they will go and destroy the stack that they built with their destruction equipment. And then once their stack is destroyed, we will score them. And they will signal to us that they are done destroying, and we will take that time to mark down what they're being scored for each of the different stack items. We'll get more into the nuances of scoring the stack items, but this is the big picture. Teams may do this process more than once, and they will receive their highest score. So it's possible that a team wants to assemble and destroy, assemble and destroy, assemble and destroy over and over again. So long as they're following this process, they will be able to do this as many times as they want. The one key caveat is, as soon as they've done their first destruction, all of the items have to be removed from the whole area, and then they can reassemble after that. So they have to give us a fresh, clean restart every single time after. From here, we are going to get into the scoring of how the assembly and stack items kind of get scored. And these are going to be scored for risk taking. So they're being scored on two different categories: the risk taking in the stack items themselves, and the risk taking in the design of the stack. So what on earth does risk taking mean? Uh, these points are an incentive for teams to go beyond a safe solution. In the challenge, the word stack is nebulous, and stack could be anything from imagine a tower of Jenga, which is kind of precarious, or just a pile of blocks on the floor. Both of these things count as a stack, but one is more risky because it's more difficult for me to carefully build up a tall, precarious stack than it is for me to just shove all the things into the center. And so that's what we're kind of getting at with risk taking is we're trying to incentivize them away from safe solutions and towards solutions that will require them to do more engineering in order to get right. Risk should be calculated and not reckless. We're not going to reward teams for doing dumb, risky things. If the analogy I like to use is if they're studying for an exam, it's a calculated risk to rank the topics of importance and focus your efforts on the most critical ones. It is a reckless risk not to study at all. So how much are they thinking about the risk they're taking? And did they choose to do this on purpose, or are they being completely cavalier with their actions? Some ways to kind of get this into our heads is we can ask ourselves, how complex is the solution? Is this stack a hard thing to build, or is it an easy thing to build? Are the stack items, because we are scored for both the design of the stack itself, so the amalgamation of the items, and the individual items, it would be much harder to stack a bunch of basketballs on top of each other into a tall tower than it would be to stack a bunch of cubes. So that's kind of what we're teasing apart in between these two things is how risky is it for us to build this stack with these items? How complex is the solution? Is it a very simple solution with one block placed on top of the other? Or is it clear that there's an apparent ordering to these things, that something could go wrong if they got the order incorrectly? Are we surprised that the solution works? If you're watching it and you think there's no way this team's going to pull it off, and they do, that's a pretty good sign that it was a risky solution. And does the solution seem safe? If it feels like they're not pushing themselves and they're just going with an easy solution, that's an indicator that it's not a high risk score. So risk is a newer thing to the DI world. So I want to pause again to open up the floor for questions about risk taking, or also about the whole process of assembly and destruction. All right, excellent.
You're doing great, Justin. Keep it up.
Thank you, Gary. All right. So Now we're going to get into some gotchas. So the real nuance and weirdness with this challenge comes in these stack items and the destruction process. So part of the requirements that the team has to do is each stack item must be clearly labeled 1 through 20. Um, it's on us to make sure that we can see this if they are clearly labeled. But if you can't tell what the stack item is, we are not able to score it. So even if you can identify where 1 through 19 are, and there's one on the ground that's clearly should be labeled 20, but you can't see the label, in your brain, you should imagine that's just a completely other thing. We need to make sure that we're scoring everything accurately and that they're labeled 1 through 20. That's part of what the prep appraiser is going to do is make sure that we can clearly see these labels of 1 through 20. Stack items must not use electricity. So if you start, this is again something that the prep appraiser will catch, but it's important that we all are aware that they are not allowed to use electricity. So no motors inside of our, no electric motors, correction, inside of our stack items. We mentioned this briefly before, but unstacked items must be removed from the target and assembly zones before beginning destruction. So there has to be a clear pause where we know that the target zones are empty and the assembly zone has all the stack items in it. And we know that, okay, whatever lands in the assembly zone, or sorry, the target zones, those were the stack items, and we're not getting confused and missing items. The team should indicate that they are done with destruction and ready to proceed. However, this is a big one for us. If they fail to signal, use your best judgment in order to determine if distract destruction has started. These kids are going to be nervous, and they might have said that the destroyer is going to raise their arm, and that's going to be our signal. Maybe the destroyer is, like I said, nervous and completely forgets to do that. But if they have a big wrecking ball and you see the wrecking ball release, that's a pretty good sign that stack destruction has started. So use your best judgment. We're not trying to penalize the kids for failures like that. Our goal is to uh, see the best in their solutions, and we don't want their whole score to be shot just because they forgot to do something like signal to us. So use your best judgment. There's going to be a lot of people watching, and so hopefully hopefully it'll be pretty obvious because there will be a stack, and then the destruction is going to happen, and there will stop being a stack. This is another really big one. The only things allowed in the assembly and target zones are the following: the stack items, assembly equipment, destruction equipment, and extension cords, as well as the team members themselves. So those are the only things that are allowed in that zone. By extension, I assume that the team members, if they have costumes on, those costumes are also allowed in the area, but they shouldn't be having props in the area.
And if they
And,
do,
huh?
and if they do, is that something we can make mention of, or do we have to let them proceed without mentioning?
You have to let them proceed without mentioning, and make sure that you tell your head appraiser, and they will communicate that to the team when they're giving back scores.
But that's not what the rules say, Justin.
What
So
are the
what they say is that if there's something else in it, the appraisers are to stop the performance and have it removed.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that is shocking to me because historically we're not allowed to interfere with the presentation. So, uh, in that case, then I will update my training and confirm that.
I will get you the what number that was.
Yes, thank you, David. That is key. Historically, we're not allowed to do anything that interrupts the presentation, so I'm shocked by that.
So is that a stop the presentation, but not the time?
It would be a stop the presentation, but not the time.
I would further want to know, once you get confirmed, that if it's stop the entire presentation, or like, let's say the team sign extended into one corner of the target zone, could we just tap the closest team member and say, hey, scoot that out?
Yeah. Well, we would want to do whatever we can do to be the least disruptive to the team. That's why we usually, the reason that this rule has historically been in place to never do things that cause the presentation to stop is because it really messes with the team's groove. They start to panic, and then everything after that, it tends to be worse. So whatever we can do to minimize the impact to the team is what we should be doing.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
So Justin, this was in section C4, and it says if your team places anything else in the assembly or target zone, you will not be able to proceed with stack assembly or stack destruction until those things are removed.
Mhm. Yeah. So it's to me, it sounds a little bit on the edge of should we stop it or not? And I would say if we have the opportunity to stop it in a way that does not completely derail the team, that's what we should do. And I will take a follow-up action to reach out to the ICMs and confirm on what we should do if there happens to be something in the area. I will communicate that to all the RCMs, who will in turn communicate it to all the appraisers. So we will definitely have an answer to what do we do if they put props in the assembly and destruction zone.
So Justin, one thing about the stack that I was wondering about is the definition of stack. It's very
Yes.
vague. So maybe could you talk a little bit about what I think stacking is? It's just in the assembly area,
Yep.
period.
Yep. Stacking is only done in the assembly area, and the definition of stack is purposely vague. Stack is whatever the team decides it to be. If
That's right.
if they call a stack 20 individual items all placed in the box, not touching each other, that's a stack. If they call it 4 different towers that they've built in the assembly area, that's also a stack. If they say it's all of them put into a pyramid, also a stack. Is whatever they say their stack is.
Yeah, and there's no requirement that they touch, actually.
Correct. There's absolutely no requirement that they touch. Again, this
So
will be in. Yep, go for it.
not having the tournament data form yet, does the tournament data form have a place for the team to put that, just define what they're defining as a stack?
Yes.
Okay.
It'll also.
And also, just so you know from the training this morning, anybody who's on here as a new appraiser might not even have a clue what a tournament data form is.
Yes. In that case, then a tournament data form is a bit of paperwork that the team fills out, explaining to us basically what's going to happen during their presentation. So they talk to us about here's what our stack assembly item is, here's what our stack looks like, here is what our story is going to be about. So you have a good preview of what you're looking for while they're presenting to us.
Hey, Justin,
Yeah.
one quick thing. On the forum, the stack items must not use electricity.
Yep.
Magnetism is not considered electricity.
Nope. Almost none of the students who are participating in DI have taken a electromagnetics physics class, so we will consider electricity and magnetism to be 2 completely separate phenomena, as if we were living in the 1800s.
Yeah, well, electromagnetic would be electrical, but magnetic by itself, because I think they're probably going to use magnets in the stack, if I had to bet.
Yep, magnets are okay. Electricity is not, even though the people who have physics degrees might take issue with that.
Thanks for the clarification.
Do the items need to stacked items? Do they need to be touching the floor?
They do not need to be touching the floor. That they can, so long as they are built on some top of something that is allowed to be in that zone. So you're allowed to have the stack items, the assembly equipment, and the destruction equipment in that zone. So long as they don't have to touch the floor, but they can only touch the things that are allowed to be in that zone. So, for example, if their destruction equipment was kind of like a trap door that fell down, and their stack items all were rollers, so that the trap door fell and everything rolled out into the area, they could build their stack up on top of their destruction equipment, and then destruction equipment could activate and they would fall down.
Mhm.
So they do not have to be on the floor. There are some caveats with the floor that we'll get to when we talk about destruction, though.
Can the team members touch the stack items?
The team members may touch the stack items. However, that might affect their design or risk-taking scores. What other questions do y'all have? These have been great.
Justin, can the assembly equipment and destruction equipment be one in the same?
They cannot be the same thing, although their distinction will be defined by the paperwork.
Okay, thanks.
They also need to have different technical methods.
Yes. So they had 2 identical grabbers, probably not okay. If they had 2 grabbers that were slightly different, one grabber used electricity and one grabber was mechanical, totally fine. moving on to the next section, destruction. This is again where things kind of get a little bit more hairy, is what happens with destruction. This is the one objective scoring element. They will be scored up to 40 points, and we have a whole rubric on how we scored this. And it's all based on where these items fall in the destruction zone. So like we said, there is an assembly zone that they're building all their stuff up in. And then there are 3 target zones, each with increasing score values. Items that land in the half point area get a half point. Items that land in the 1 point area get 1 point. And items that score land in the 2 point area get 2 points. We have a whole worksheet that I'll show you in a little bit that kind of helps us organize this. But if you are on the task of scoring these destruction points, you're going to have to be keeping track of where each of the 20 items land in this zone. So you'll, on your paper, you'll write, oh, item 1 landed in point zone 1. Item 2 landed in point zone 2. Item 3 landed in point zone 1/2. And you'll be doing all of these things trying to figure out how many points they're getting. And I'm sure everybody's burning with questions about, oh, what happens if things are across different score zones? What happens if they stay connected? And we're going to dive into all of those on this next slide. Well, correction. We're going to dive into a little bit of a bigger picture, and then we'll dive into that. So the assembly zone is going to be towards the front of the area. So the audience is going to be down at the bottom. Then we'll have the assembly zone. And then all of this space is for the rest of their props and stuff. So this is, we're going to do our best to make this work. At most of the sites, only the assembly zone and target zone will be taped. This outside box will not be taped. Some sites might do that, but we've moved away from boxing them into this 20 foot by 20 foot because we want to make sure that they have the room to do whatever they want to do. But this will be taped and it will be towards the front of the area.
Whoa, hey, Justin,
Yep,
I'm sorry, but I've got a question on this.
shoot.
Oh, okay, we have got zones, target zones,
Yep.
shown in the challenge that are that are below that assembly zone area. So let's say, for instance, we have, the bleacher line, or what we normally use
Mhm.
for the outside of the 20-foot area.
Yep.
We can't do that because we've got to get these bottom target zones in there.
This is the assembly and target zone. So that bleacher line should probably be this line right here.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, my misunderstanding. So that does include the target zones as well.
Correct. So this
Okay,
box right here fits into this box right here.
yeah. Okay, that's cool.
Although we do need to leave some space there still
Yep,
between,
absolutely.
yeah, that's not really the bleacher line. You need some space.
Yeah.
So that we, as the appraisers, can be walking through there and checking things and the
Exactly.
audience doesn't spill into that space.
Well, there's also concern if it's too close, if their destruction sends things exploding and they hit the audience.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. RCMs, I encourage you to use your discretion. The general guidance is the assembly zone should be towards the front of the area. But that's about it. Just make sure that it's towards the front and that you should be envisioning the line that is this line right here. This should be like the proscenium of the area that they're performing on.
So also it means that appraisers for the presentation are going to want to get up and move towards the back of the area where they're not going to hear the kids.
How do you mean?
If they're watching the story, if they're appraising the story,
Mhm.
sitting in the audience, hearing the story is going to be really hard.
This is another big thing. As appraisers, move around. You do not have to sit still in the audience. If you need a better viewing angle in order to see the assembly zone, move to be able to see it. If you need to be able to hear better because you're scoring the story, move so you can hear. We've taught the teams that you will be moving around, and they know to expect that. Obviously, don't like walk in front of their presentation and like make it so that their parents can't see them perform. But within the bounds of being respectful of the team, move to wherever you need to be.
It's only going to take us 2.5 hours to tape this, but that's life, I guess, huh?
Yeah. All right. So here is an example of that score sheet that I was telling you. We will see along the left-hand side, we have all the different stack items. And moving into the center area, we have one for each zone. This is a note I need to send to Kate and the RCMs that we are probably going to want more than one of the, we may or may not want more than one of this thing for each team because we only have trials 1, 2, and 3. So we will have to work with our RDs in order to determine how many of these we want for each team. But if a team does 5 trials, it won't fit, but we will solve that problem when we come to it. So this looks pretty complicated, but all you really have to be doing is Xing. So you look for stack item 1. It landed in zone 1, X. Oh, there was an issue with the destruction, X. And then just mark all of these things and don't bother scoring until you've gone back to your seats.
So, Justin,
Yeah.
you list these stack issues and destroy issues. Are we supposed to use those codes or just an X? Because you just said X in the stack issue or destroy issue.
It's up to you. If it's something that you feel needs to be communicated to the team, I would use the codes. Otherwise, you can just use an X. This is
Okay.
a tool for you to use, and you can use it however you want to use it.
Will we have these as hard copies or will it be
You will
on
have
the
hard
online?
copies.
And we're going to have the teams on the score sheets, right? In other words, that'll all be printed. What score sheet, what team is on the score sheet?
Yeah, what I might do is I might push the RDs to print one of these for each team, and then like maybe 10 like blank ones that don't have a team name on them. That way, if the team does several trials, which I'm not expecting most teams to do a bunch of trials, I think 3 is a reasonable upper limit. But I wouldn't be shocked if we had 1 or 2 teams who went above that. Um, and in that case, then we can just use a blank version of this without the team name identified.
Copy that. That's a great idea, man.
Yeah. Let me write that down. Okay. All right. As we had seen briefly, there are many destroy issues and stack issues that can come about. And Tristan, do you want to walk us through these mini gotchas that we have with the destruction?
Yeah. Top of the list, most importantly, is nothing other than the tournament provided floor and other stack items may touch, move, or direct your stack items once the stack item has fully exited the plane of the assembly zone. That's the small 2x2 square in the middle of all of the target zones. So nothing beyond that gray zone. Once a stack item passes outside of that gray zone, nothing besides the floor and other stack items can move or touch the stack item. And this notably includes the team's destruction equipment. So this is pretty important when it comes to, destruction equipment that uses potentially less direct forms of contact, such as wind power or magnetism or anything of that nature. That those also count as touching, moving, or directing. The stack items coming to rest in more than one zone will be scored at the lowest point value among the zones it occupies. So if a stack item hits the boundary between the 1/2 and the 1 point zone, then we consider it a 1/2 point. We round down in this case. And this also includes the outer boundary. So the target zone has the 2-point maximum outer boundary. If a stack item lands in between that and like outside of that, the outside zone is technically considered a 0 point, so it's the lowest value. So that would result in a 0 score for that particular stack item. Stack items don't have to be detached when they're destroyed. So when a team, for example, destroys and flings out 2 or 3 stack items that are all connected, say, by a magnet, we score it just like we would the normal stack item, except all of the stack items get to the lowest value point of whatever stack item is in the lowest zone. So if you had like a bundle of 4 stack items and it got launched out and it was in between the 1 and the 2 point zone line, then all 4 of those stack items get the 1 point value, regardless of whether if some of them are entirely in the 2 point zone or not, because they are all connected. This includes this is not necessarily like connected and in a like an official sense, but also like if they're touching. So like if the team has used one stack item and it hits another stack item and they remain in contact afterwards, then we consider that a conglomerate in this case.
Okay.
Brad, do you have a question?
I think that last bit answered it on the definition of attached is what I was going to ask. If they're simply touching, is that attached? So yes.
So on touching, do we do if we can slide a piece of paper between them? Are they touching, or how are we defining touching?
That's what I would score as touching, a slide a piece of paper between them. As a mathematician, I can say that if the touching if touching is a problem, it'll probably be obvious where the two items will be scored, because you can imagine that if you have two things that are just touching each other, unless they land exactly on the line, one of the two items will be the item. One of the two items will be crossing that line, unless the intersection of the two items is exactly on the line, which is incredibly unlikely to happen. So yes, paper between them means that if you can't slide a paper between them means they're touching.
Okay.
Cool. All right. What questions do y'all have on this? This is complicated, and I've got an example later on in the slide that's going to kind of go through scoring all of these things.
You may have said this earlier, but so if a stack item is influenced by the destruction equipment after it exits the assembly zone, that is automatically a 0-point item?
Correct.
Yes. All right.
Yeah. If it's touched, influenced, or by anything other than the floor, it automatically turns into a 0.
The floor or other stack items.
Yep. Now, there is a weird nuance here, where, let's say, you have two items that are connected, and it launches across the zone, and you touch one of the two items. The score of the conglomerate will be scored as if you didn't touch the one item. So if you have got like the two that are touching each other, and they are both in the 2-point zone, and I touched one of the two items, this one item right here will still be scored as 2 points, even though I touched this item that's attached to it.
Okay.
And yeah, go for it.
If an item, is it where the item ends at rest? Like if an item goes, say, fully outside of the target zones, but somehow comes back in and lands at rest in the target zone.
It is at rest.
Okay, that's where it's scored. Okay.
And they could, like, if they're pushing stack items out and they keep pushing against other stack items, as long as their destruction device doesn't cross the assembly zone, they could, because stack items could come to rest and then they could still be pushed further out, right?
Correct.
I mean, at rest means when they're finished with destruction.
Correct. At the very end.
Okay.
Again, use your judgment to determine when they're done with destruction. Ideally, it's fairly obvious, and we've warned all the teams that they should make sure that we have ample time to score these things, because we have communicated to them that scoring 20 items and figuring out exactly where they land is a difficult task. So make sure we have time to do it.
Okay. So if an item is still at motion when they give the destruction conclusion signal, we score it of where it was when they give that signal, even if it moves past that point?
If it's like a ball that's rolling,
yeah.
Score it wherever the ball stops, when it actually stops. If they do their thing, they give their signal, and we're standing there trying to score the things, and appraisers are talking to the team, and somebody accidentally bumps one of the items, use your best judgment to try to score it where it was. Basically, don't reward teams for if they have all their balls and they're all rolling and they say stop right now, right while they're all there. Like, no, that doesn't count. But use your best judgment, and if it's not actively moving and it has stopped and it was clear that they meant for it to be scored there, and then something happens, there's a depending on how bad that something happened and who caused it, score it like that. That would be a question for your RD, or not your RD, your RCM, because it'll be really dependent on the exact situation.
So I'm kind of confused on the one where you said if boxes or stack items, if they are attached and they touch one of them, then that's the only one that's disqualified.
Yep.
If they had a whole string of stack items that are attached and they touch one of them, which moves all of them into the 2-point zone, then what do we do?
They get 19 scored for 2 points and one scored for 0 points. This was specifically called out by the ICMs, and they've called it the sacrificial item solution. And that is it is perfectly valid. Although I would encourage you to think about the risk taking involved there.
So along those lines, one of the things that would be, it seems like this would be okay, is that if one of your stack items is a mechanical arm,
Yep.
and that mechanical arm picks up an item and directs it to like the 2-point area and drops it and then picks it, that would still be completely valid solution, because that mechanical arm is never fully crossed the boundaries.
Correct. Yeah. So they're very weird. But the big idea is the only thing that can touch other stack items during the destruction process is the floor and stack items. And if you are doing something creative that allows one of your stack items to do work to increase the score of the other stack items, that is a perfectly valid solution.
So you could have, let's say, a ramp also that just sort of funnels everything down to the one scoring area and say that's one of your stacking items.
Absolutely.
As long as they can get the ramp in and out of the assembly and target zones in between attempts.
But they can always just carry that in, and that would be valid too.
Right.
Yep.
Unless they define it, but if they define that ramp as a stack item,
It
That's
can't
correct.
Yeah. The ramp would be a stack item. It's no longer a destruction equipment. So your question is, what is now their destruction equipment, and how much is that contributing? Because if their destruction equipment isn't contributing much to these items being moved from the assembly zone to the target zones, then that will
Right.
affect its design and implementation scores. What other questions do y'all have? Awesome. So let's move on to some quiz questions. Okay, let's see. Do we want to do the quiz questions now, or do we want to talk about the story? Let's do the quiz questions because this is fresh in our brains. Okay, so question 1. Team Mighty Wind use the modified leaf blower destruction equipment to push stack items with air during stack destruction. The appraisers closely watch the team. For 10 of the stack items, the stream of air stops interacting with the stack item before it crosses the boundary of the assembly zone. All 10 of these stack items land in the 1-point zone. For the other 10 stack items, the stream of air continues to guide each stack item to 2 points target zone. What score has the team earned? A, B, C, or D? I'll give you all a second to read those answers and put them in the chat.
Although I would say it would be, if you're using wind to, it would be nearly impossible to actually stop the wind before the items leave the assembly or the assembly zone.
I don't disagree. I think the intent with this rule is to make
Yeah,
sure that you're not guiding it. So if you have
right.
a burst of wind, it says that you click the leaf blower on and it blows out and you click it off before it leaves. I think that counts even though the wind is like continuing. But if you leave it on while it's crossing the boundary, then it ceases to count.
Got it.
So I saw a lot of Bs. They would get the 10 stack items that were moved by the airstream only within the vertical boundaries of the assembly zone would be scored based on where the stack items come to rest. So they would get 10 points total. Does anybody disagree with that answer? Nope. All right, y'all are smart cookies. It is in fact B. And exactly as Michael indicated, the intent of this is that they are not designing destruction equipment that can guide the things straight to the 2-point zone. They are being incentivized to go from inside the assembly zone to the target zones without much guidance. Tristan, do you want to read the next question?
Yep. Team Flocks and Smocks has a solution where the 20 stack items all look like little artistic sheep. The stack assembly I don't know what that word is supposed to be. Conglomerates all of the sheep into a herd in the assembly zone. After signaling the appraisers at that the stack assembly is complete, the team continues on to stack destruction. The team's destruction equipment is a set of tongs that are made from a spring and 2 large paintbrushes. One team member holds the tongs while standing in the assembly zone and flings the sheep towards the target zones. As the scoring appraiser, you watch the team's members' technique and notice that the tongs are releasing the stack items before they cross the vertical planes of the assembly zone. After all of the stack items have been tossed, you notice a sheep on the taped line between the 1 and the 2-point target zones. The head is in the 2-point target zone, and the back feet are in the 1-point target zone. What does this stack item earn for score?
All right, this is a quick one. A, B, C, or D. 0, a half point, 1 point, or 2 points. All right. Seeing a bunch of C's. All right. Y'all are on it. C is correct. Question 3 continues on with teams Flock and Smocks. This time they set up their second attempt at stack assembly and destruction. After signaling that stack assembly is complete, the team continues on to destruction. The same team member holds the destruction equipment while standing in the assembly zone and flings the sheep towards the target zones. As the scoring appraiser, you watch the team member's technique and notice the tongs are releasing some of the stack items after the tongs are across the vertical plane of the assembly zone. How do you score the target zones for those stack items? All right, I'll give you another opportunity to read A, B, and C. I'm seeing a bunch of A's. Anybody disagree with A? Pay attention and write on your technical worksheet which stack items were released by the destruction equipment before crossing the vertical plane of the assembly zone. Does anybody think it's B? Score 0 for all the stack items because the destruction equipment was moving in and out of the assembly zone throughout the destruction?
Mm.
All right. Everybody thinks it's A. Nobody wants to be a contrarian. Despite my best attempts to trick you into giving me the wrong answer, it is in fact A. Question 4. Sorry, I kind of gave away the answer if you were watching quick. I wanted to see how many more questions I had.
So the key one with that one, I mean, you're trying to get at is that the destruction equipment does not have to be in the zone. It can be anywhere.
Correct.
Same thing with the assembly. It can be anywhere.
Yep, both items can be anywhere you want them to be. Question 4. Tristan, you want to read this one?
The same team member holds the destruction. I assume we're continuing with the previous.
Team Flocks and Smocks.
The same team member holds the destruction equipment while standing in the assembly zone and flings the sheep towards the target zones. After flinging one sheep towards the target zones and overshooting the 2-point target zone, the team member sets the destruction equipment down in the assembly zone. The team member goes to pick up the sheep from its resting place outside of the target zones. The team member then uses the sheep to push all the other sheep from the assembly zone into the target zones. The team member is careful to only make contact with the one sheep in its hand. You see that the sheep is the only thing contacting the other sheep besides the tournament provided floor. While this is happening, the sheep in hand pushes the others all towards the 2-point target zone. After all of the sheep have come to rest in the target zones, All of them are in the 2-point target zone. How do you score the target zones for the stack items?
We'll do this one quickly because I think we already more or less discussed this one. But this is exactly what we talked about earlier as the sacrificial item solution. So the correct answer is D. All of them will receive 2 points except the one that they touched, which will get 0 points. So
Justin, I have a question about this though, because it seems like they started destruction, but then went and picked up the sheep and brought it back
Mhm.
and so it seems like they didn't complete destruction and then they started assembly again.
Yep.
Is that okay?
If they started assembly again, it would not be okay. So if they had tried to use their assembly equipment to return the sheep to the area, that would probably be an indicator to us as appraisers that they have started assembly again. However, because they did not signal that they were done with the destruction, we would assume that they were continuing with their destruction. And based on their actions, it seemed like their intent was that they will use this sheep as their sacrificial item to get all the other ones into the higher score point zone. So even though they had done stuff that was like manipulating these items, all these manipulations are okay because they didn't do this after they said that they were done with the destruction.
And then how, because how do they use this one sheep to push all the other ones all the way out to the 2-point zone
Yeah,
without having their destruction equipment cross the assembly zone?
I agree with Michael.
I'm
How do you have
confused. I don't know how this would even actually be physically possible.
Basically, the idea was they used their tongs, they flung the sheep out, they didn't care where it landed. They put the tongs down, they walked over and picked the sheep up, carried it back into the assembly zone, which again, totally fine, and just used it like a shovel to push the other ones.
Well, but you have to have a 20-inch sheep, right?
Why would you have to have a 20-inch sheep?
Well, how does it reach and not leave the assembly zone? How
It
does
does
it reach target zone 2? That's 20 inches.
It's
right?
allowed to leave the zones.
But now your destruction equipment is the person. I don't understand.
The
It's
destruction
because it's your stack item is doing it. Your destruction item only has to destruct one thing. It doesn't even have to destruct one thing necessarily.
So consider this a weird
Oh,
twisted variant of the solution where, for example, they have a bowling ball and a bunch of pins, and all of that is their stack items, and their destruction equipment is this mallet that whacks the bowling ball and spreads all of the pins out, plus the bowling ball all leave. So the destruction still happened because the destruction equipment interacted with one of the stack items that cascaded that to all of the other stack items. That's a perfectly valid solution, and this is analogous to that, just in a really bad kind of messed up way that they've destructed one stack item, and then that stack item has caused all of the other stack items to leave the assembly zone and get put in the target zone.
And this is where it's like the rest of their solution influences really who wins.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'd have to see this one. I'd have to.
well, and the risk taking would be very low for this.
Exactly.
So am I correct in what I posted on the chat that these questions are from globals and everyone appraising sees them in the training documents for
Yes.
appraising? Okay.
I picked the ones that I thought were there were more like story ones, but I thought that it was most pertinent to get to these weird little nuances.
This is not a Colorado interpretation. This is the global.
Yeah, these are globals. This is coming down from high.
So actually, quick question then, Justin. So the risk taking scores, it's risk taking in the stack items and then risk taking in the design of the stack.
Mhm.
There's no risk taking in the destruction of the stack.
I would call this risk taking in the design of the stack.
Really?
Sorry, not the design of the stack, the design of the stack items. Because we designed our stack items to behave in this way. Well, that's not a very risky way to design.
Yeah, that's not, I mean, the way that risk taking is worded, I would not interpret it that way, but because it's really risk taking, like you said earlier, should risk takings in the stack items if they're, well, never mind. I don't know.
I agree with you. It's a little funky.
It's very weird. I don't like that wording. Okay.
It's a loophole And none of us like loopholes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a
And
huge loophole. I mean, all it is they could just take one. They can even just like you said, do the tongs and then push and pick up one of the items and then push everything out.
and I hate to say it, but it's a loophole that if we see teams doing it and we find out that they came up with the solution because of interference, we have to be ready to score that appropriately.
Mm-hmm.
Good point.
So there are not restrictions on what kind of force can be used to remove the stack items from the assembly zone. It doesn't have to be the destruction equipment.
Correct.
In this case, we would probably score the destruction equipment quite low, but
Yep. Because its design isn't such that it can consistently get the high scores. The thing that allowed them to get the high score was their other stack items being used as a plunger, which is not the design of the destruction equipment itself.
Okay.
It all comes down to the definition and the rules here of directed.
Yep.
So, I mean, that's a gray area for directed, and they chose to take a very broad, saying that it directed means the direct object that's pushing it is how it's being controlled.
Is it too late to do the scientific challenge?
For you, Gary, it's
Not allowed to leave the technical challenge. Come on.
yeah, Gary, you're about a decade too late to jump ship from the Tech 8 challenge.
Yeah, okay.
All right. Moving on to question 5. Team Crushing It has completed stack assembly and signaled the beginning of stack destruction. The destruction equipment is a team-made crane with a wrecking ball. The body of the crane rests outside the vertical boundaries of the assembly zone and swings the wrecking ball through the assembly zone, making contact with the stack fully within the assembly zone boundaries. By the time the stack items are propelled through the air across the vertical plane of the assembly zone, the wrecking ball is no longer in contact with any of the items. How should the team's solution be scored? A. Because the destruction equipment was not fully within the assembly zone, the team should not earn any points. However, the destruction equipment can be scored for technical design and innovation. B. Because the destruction equipment was not fully within the assembly zone, the team should not earn any points for their IVC1, and the team should also earn no points for the technical design and innovation, because their destruction equipment was not valid. C. Score the team normally for stack destruction in IVC1. However, the team should earn no points for technical design and innovation because the destruction equipment was not valid. And D. Score the team normally for stack destruction and for technical design and innovation. Seeing a couple of D's in the chat. Does anybody think it's A? Because it wasn't in there, we're not going to give them any points, but they are going to get points for their destruction. All right.
I honestly do not remember the specific wording of the rule, so.
Well, once again, I need to work on my tricky teacher skills and try to convince you of the wrong answer because y'all were correct. It is, in fact, D. There are no rules on where the destruction equipment has to be. It does not have to fit within the assembly zone. So the destruction equipment can be completely outside of the entire zone if you wish for it to be. So it is D. Everything is totally fine. The destruction equipment can be outside of the zone. All right. Last up, we have your final exam. This one is not coming from Globals. This one is one that I made. I would like you all to score each of these different stack items. For a little bit of context, anything that's red means that there was some kind of destruction issue. So for our purposes, let's imagine that all of the red ones, so number 4 and number 7, were touched while they were outside of the assembly zone by a team member. So I'm going to give you all a little bit of time to do this. In fact, a little bit of time is going to be We gave you all to 1145, so that's or correction, 1146. So you all have a little bit more than a minute left.
To be honest, I haven't had enough time to memorize what you told us 5 minutes ago. Without a hard copy to refer back to, I don't believe I can complete this exercise.
That is totally fine. No, we're kind of going a little bit fast. For once, I'm seeing some not the same answers. This is good. Excellent. Cool. So I'm generally seeing, I've seen some 7.5s and some 3.5s. That's about the vibes of what I'm getting. And I think the issue with the 7.5 versus the 3 is I think that people are knowing how to score 9 because it's 1 point. They're knowing how to score 1. It's definitely 1/2 point. They know how to score 2 and 3 because it crosses the boundary between the 1 point zone and the 2 point zone. So both of these are going to score for 1 point. The issues are coming with these items and these items. These ones are a little weird. So we're going to start with the more straightforward one. We had discussed before that items will be scored for the whole conglomerate if they're attached. But this one was touched, so this one gets 0 points. However, this one gets 0 points, but both of these items are still in the 2 point zone. So the whole conglomerate, every item in the conglomerate should get scored for 2 points unless they were touched, in which case they get 0. So 7 is going to get 0, and 8 is going to get 2 points. And this is exactly the same idea we had with the sheep, where the team member used the one sheep to move all the other sheep to the 2 point zone. It's the exact same idea, except there's only one item being moved. So the 7 was used to move the 8 or happened to be touched, in which case the 8 is going to still get the full 2 points. However, the 7 is going to get no points because it was touched.
So Justin, if item 8 had come to stop in the 1/2 point zone,
Yep.
and then item 7 touched it in the 1/2 point zone and moved it to the 2 point, would it stay at the 1/2 point or would it go at the 2 point?
It would get the 2 points. It's wherever they are at the very end of destruction.
It's at the very end. It's not where it stops moving.
Correct.
Okay.
Right. Our other really weird one is this pile right here with 4, 5, and 6. So the basic logic is, okay, ignore the fact that 4 got touched. All right, this is a conglomerate of 3 items, 4, 5, and 6. We score the conglomerate based on wherever the lowest point total that the conglomerate intersects. So 4, 5, and 6 intersect the 1/2 point. So all of these items would get 1/2 point. However, because 4 was touched, instead of getting a 1/2 point, it gets 0. So 4 gets 0, but 5 and 6 both get a 1/2 point, even though they are fully within the 1 point zone. So this guy right here is probably the weirdest one. And if you understand this example, I think you are understanding what's going on here. So because I think this is so important, I'm just going to explain exactly what I said one more time. So because these 3 items are a conglomerate, they all get the same score, and that score is whatever the lowest zone it is. So all of them should be scored for 1/2. However, because 4 was touched, instead of getting 1/2, it gets 0. All right, so moving on to the next slide. We kind of see what this would look like if you were doing this on your paper. So we see that we have some checks for destroy issues. So because this landed in the 1/2 point zone, it's got a check, but because it's got this destroy issue, it turns into a 0. So summing these up, we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.5. So 7.5 is the correct answer. Did I do my math right?
Nope.
Nope.
6.5.
6.5. Okay.
The simple maths catches you up, huh, Justin?
Yes.
That's not complex enough for you.
Yes. Mhm.
So on this sheet, scoring sheet, what would be a stack issue?
Let's look back to what we have. We've way farther back. We've got some examples. So it wasn't in the assembly zone. It didn't get used. They had too many items in the assembly zone, or team members assembled the stack item. So these are just like things for us to keep track of. And if these things are happening, we address it using a legal procedure deduction.
So, Justin, those last two additional items in the assembly zone and team member assembled stack items, the additional items in the assembly zone, that affects everything, not just individual. I don't know how would that be addressed in scoring?
Like I said, this is something we would talk to the team about, and it would if we have the opportunity, we will tell the team to fix the issue. If we don't have the opportunity to tell the team to fix the issue, we will make a note to talk to the team about it, and we'll evaluate it if it mattered for their solution. So if they happen to have a prop that was barely in the zone, it probably didn't really affect their solution. We'll talk to the team about it. If they have a large prop that is blocking our view and making it so that we can't tell if they are successfully assembling the items, then we'll probably give them a legal procedure deduction. As a general rule, I imagine the stack issues is probably mostly just going to be that not used item. We're probably not going to see a whole lot of stack issues. We're mostly going to see the destroy issues.
So if there are additional items in the assembly zone and none of them get scored, are we even going to take the time and the effort to go through writing down the scores for everything?
You should go through the effort.
Okay.
Yeah, because what if you were wrong? What if you thought one thing was not
Somebody else saw it. Okay.
Yeah, or if whatever it was there gets fixed eventually, or if it turns out not to be as big of a deal as you thought it was going to be. It's better to have the answer to the question of how much should they have scored than it is to not get that answer at all.
I'm also seeing an issue with this if we're discussing it with the team and they're arguing points. If we say something was touching something else, that there isn't a place to indicate that on this sheet.
Yeah, that is a very good point.
That is a really good point.
Yeah. If you want to, you could mark like a little plus if they're like touching each other. So like just do like a little you give a check for your score, and then if you have a conglomerate, maybe you do like label the conglomerates. 1 is one conglomerate, and then put like a little 1 next to all the ones that are in a conglomerate together, or like a little star and a triangle and
star or something like, okay.
Yeah, just like some
star
kind of
plus mark.
Yeah, this is, like I said, this is a tool for yourselves.
Right.
And if you think it would be useful to know these 3 items are touching, however you want to indicate that to yourself is totally fine.
Because I'm just thinking that whoever's doing the scoring, our scores are going to have to match, correct?
Yes.
So if one of us sees it and one of us doesn't, that we need to be able to adjust it at the end. Okay.
Yeah, this is exactly why, to the extent that we are able to, this will be its own job, and 2 appraisers will only be concerned with scoring these trials.
We'll
I can
see.
see it.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying, I can see a lot of confusion from team members. I'm guessing there's been some clarifications sent out.
Yes.
Where can we as appraisers view those?
There is a clarification summary that we will be bringing with us, like RCMs and ACMs will bring that with us to the thing. I will have the RCMs send it out to you with your scheduling email that says, "Oh, show up at this site at 7:45 a.m." or whatever. I don't want to be putting that out particularly publicly because these things are for appraisers only. So I will make sure that they get to you, but it's not going to be right now.
Okay, but please before tournament day, morning of seems way too short of notice.
Yes.
I'm trying to think, anybody else can, if they remember correctly, that when we get on for the scoring platform, when we can get on and start looking at the scoring platform, that on there, it also gives us the clarifications?
It will give you the team's clarifications.
Right, but does it have the general ones too or not?
There is a special document that is the clarification summary where they took all 1,000 or so clarifications that were asked and distilled it into a 2-page document. And that document exists in the resource area, but you have to have special powers in order to access it.
Okay.
And we kind of keep it a little tight because it is for appraisers only, and we want to make sure that the teams aren't getting their eyes on it.
So from a pragmatic standpoint, the head appraiser, when we're debriefing the team on this, score sheet that we have, of course, has to, first of all the scores have to match. But it's almost like we need a third score sheet that is the summary of all of this. I'm not sure that's going to show up on the mobile scoring. Is it that way? I mean, to Jenny's point, debriefing the teams on this, they're going to have a lot of questions. And they're going to feel that they made something and not understand these nuances. I mean, the appraisers barely understand these nuances. So it's going to be really rough debriefing the teams. I guess that's my point.
Yep. I don't disagree. I think that it might be wise to collect a score sheet from your scoring appraisers so that you can have that when you go back for discussions. Since I'm pretty sure in the system, we're just going to plug in the total. I don't know because I haven't seen how they have it set up this year, but in years past, you've just plugged in a total.
Okay. Well, we'll have to look at it and see, because I really see that as being a big issue.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
So, Justin, can you take a picture of it as an appraiser, then use it for scoring later while between teams?
The picture of the score sheet?
No, picture of the assembly area and of where everything fell.
They won't let us do that.
Yeah, I vaguely remember a rule saying no, don't do that. I think it's somewhere in the challenge or somewhere in one of the appraiser summaries. And there's something about interference and timeliness or something like that that says that's the argument for why they don't want you doing that.
Is the schedule at regionals going to be the same as it's been past years, where team every 20 minutes? This just seems like it's going to take more time.
Yep, it's going to be 20 minutes. That's how they have to do it. It's going to be tight. And if we start getting behind, there are breaks in there to catch us back up.
Well, and we also have to do this scoring during their 8 minutes, so we have to be moving fast.
Yep. This is why we're trying to make this thing its own job.
Yeah.
So Justin, it might help to actually create some more scoring examples like you did and share them with everybody, and then we can all have those and just practice, and just so that we know, okay, this is because we're like we're going to have to be fast at this, so we're going to have to have experience with scoring before the tournament.
Sure. I can make some more examples and send them out as a little quiz sheet.
Yeah,
I
agree with Michael.
I also think that it might be nice for whoever's talking to the teams afterwards and discussing their score, have that example with all the different possibilities on there, so you can point to, hey, this is what happened, so they understand too.
For sure, I can definitely do that.
Yeah, I have to agree with Michael on this, Justin. This is a great learning experience. I have to admit I wasn't looking at these kinds of nuances. So, maybe just worksheets
Yep.
till we get it down and we can do it in, you know, nanoseconds, then we're fine.
We can all pretend we're in high school algebra again, doing grinding exercises over and over.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if a team manager takes a picture of the layout and then brings it back to sort of dispute their scores, how should we handle that?
That's a dialogue.
Okay. So that would automatically go to a dialogue, or do we actually try to resolve that?
If use your best judgment as an RCM. If you think it's resolvable without a dialogue, do it. But I think you have to do a dialogue in order to change the score. But as soon as pictures get involved, that sounds like a dialogue immediately, because we're not allowed to take pictures, but if they do, and the question becomes like, when was this picture taken? Like, I don't know that it was at the end of the presentation. What if these items had been bumped? There are just so many things that have to be discussed that it needs to move to the more formal.
And I'd also just say for anybody who's on here where this is their first time appraising, that's not your role. That's the head appraiser at the site's role. Don't get stressed thinking you're going to have to do that.
Yes. Yes, that is a very good point, Jenny. If you are on this and you're scoring it, do your best scoring, and your head appraiser will take care of any fallout. So do your best, get it. Your head appraiser has your back. Okay. All right. Well, we spent all this time talking about stack items and technical stuff, but there's a whole part of the challenge that we have not talked about at all, the story. Tristan, do you want to quickly take us through the story?
Yeah, so as a refresher from the beginning of the presentation, the story that the teams are coming up with has to involve a character lacking something important and attempting to gain it. And there has to also be a wishful scene at some point in the presentation, as well as a frustration point. So these elements are kind of broken down into their respective scoring strategies. There's your standard creativity of the story scoring element and clear and effective storytelling categories as well, plus the two story-specific scoring elements, the dramatic impact of the wishful scene and frustration point. And then last but not least is the integration of the assembly and destruction into the presentation. I believe there's a special slide for this one.
This is my in my many years of making presentations. This is the favorite slide that I've ever made, and this is how do we think about integration. So we've got integration. What's the deal with this integration thing? Integration is all about how do the pieces of the solution fit together. This slide is a pretty slide. It would fit really well in a business presentation talking about quarterly reports. However, it doesn't fit into our theme of our Arctic theme with all these penguins. So even though this individually is a pretty slide, it doesn't fit with the rest of the presentation. So you should ask yourselves, if we remove this piece from our presentation, how much worse would the presentation be? How connected is the presentation, and does everything match our theme? So we're being scored for the integration of the stack assembly and destruction into the presentation. So is this action important to the story, or could you remove it? Or is the stack assembly happening in one place, completely divorced from the rest of the story that's being told? Maybe they have a volcano that's blowing up, and that's their stack assembly and destruction. And they've got a volcano, it blows up and shoots the stack pieces everywhere. But they're off telling a story about how lovely it is to be Christmas time. These two things might be connected, but they might be completely disjointed. And if they're completely disjointed, no matter how good the two things are individually, the fact that they're disjointed means that you're going to score lowly for your integration. Okay. So the very last element that we have for scoring is our team choice elements. And these are your team's opportunity to showcase something special. It's the thing that makes each team unique, and it's the thing that they bring that is special. So there are going to be two of these things, and they could be anything under the sun. And they're going to be scored for creativity and originality. which is akin to design, is akin to innovation back in the technical world. The quality workmanship and effort that is evident. This is their design score. And the integration into the presentation. Again, how important is this? It's not uncommon for us to see teams, they are giving their presentation and their team choice element is a song. And they do their presentation, they stop, the team sings the song, and then they pick up where they were going. And that can affect the integration. It's like, was that necessary to the story? If they never sung that song, how much is the story impacted? And that's up to you and each individual team, but these are the kind of things you want to be thinking about. All right. That is everything under the sun for this technical challenge. It was a lot. What questions do y'all have?
One thing to note is that the story is 80 points. That's huge compared to, so if you're a team looking at this from a strategic standpoint, 80 points is big in terms of story. So just pointing that out.
Remind me where we get a copy of the challenge itself.
You get a copy of the challenge on the resource area, which you might not have access to. Let me real quick. I'm just going to go.
Earlier in the presentation, Kate set out a little flash that was on there, which I'm hoping isn't going to be on everybody's recording, because it has the link as well as the password code for getting on. That'll be there. I think she said on Monday. That where you'll be able to get all of the challenges and as well as there should be a book for appraiser training.
In 1 second, I'm just going to drop a copy of the challenge into our chat here, just so that you all can download it right now if you want to.
Thank you.
Let me just find it. 2024, 2025, open. There you go. I just sent a PDF into the chat, so feel free to download it. This presentation will also be posted online if you want to review it later.
Now the crucial question, how many of the appraisers in this training are doing Jeffco?
This is also a very important thing. Because of the way our systems work, we don't have like a digital system telling us that you were here in this room. So please do me a favor, and to ensure that you are appraising the tech challenge because you trained for the tech challenge, in the chat, post the following: your first and last name, your email address, and the tournament you plan on attending. If you plan on attending more than one, awesome. Please let us know all those so we can get those to the appropriate regional challenge masters. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to do this. And again, I want to make sure last year this was an issue where people ended up not in the challenge that they trained for. So in order to prevent that, please make sure you do this so that you are scoring the thing that you spent the last couple hours learning how to do.
Yeah, I hope we have a lot more appraisers than showed up for the training, because we're gonna need a lot of appraisers for this challenge this year.
Yes.
We'll make it much easier if we have like 9 or 10.
Andrea, I saw you post. Ah, beautiful. Thank you. I got all of y'all who were not RCMs, so thank you for filling out that information for us. Lastly, thank you once again for volunteering to be appraisers. The program doesn't work without volunteers, so thank you for being willing to give up this morning and a future Saturday, and possibly two if you come to state. to do this for the kids. It really means a lot. If you have any questions, if you are going through this and you wake up in the middle of the night tonight with a burning question that needs answered, here are our email addresses. Feel free to reach out, and we are going to be happy to answer that.
Good job, Justin. That was, in fact, a learning experience.
Good. I am
And
now going to stop the recording.
Justin and Tristan, thank you. Well,